Hi, I'm Alana, an artist, poet, and trauma alchemist, and I love helping you love all that you are. On this channel, you will find practical tools and really embodied stories that get you into the heart of how you can love the past, present, and future of who you are. So if you like this channel, I invite you to like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And know that what you find here can illuminate what's possible for you in your self-love journey. But if you really want to turn this information into transformation, I do have a beautiful, intimate one-on-one coaching program called Love True that you're welcome to email me about. So put the link below for that. So without further ado, let's get started. So when I think of self-love, I can't help but remember a story from a woman I know, worked with her for years. And she keeps the nightgown of that her grandma actually wore on her wedding night in her closet. So this grandma was, for this woman's early childhood, a pivotal caregiver. I mean, she was love incarnate. She was voluptuous and beautiful, and wherever she walked, wherever she laughed, the sun shined. And when this woman was 8 years old, not the grandma, but the granddaughter who I worked with, she was vacationing at her grandmother's home, and the grandmother had overdosed on Prozac in an attempt to end her life. So that little 8-year-old girl saw her grandmother immediately after she had overdosed on Prozac. And she remembers sitting with her grandma on the couch as she was dazed in her white nightgown. She was sitting at her knees and reaches out her hands to touch her grandma's hand. And the grandma brushes it away and looks out the window. And in that moment, this woman told me that she felt like she had lost love. She had lost access to what love meant to her. She had lost access to the sunshine and the laughter and the nurturing that her grandmother gave her. And she vowed to herself in that moment to become everything her grandmother couldn't be. So, prior to that moment, that little girl had seen domestic violence, constant arguments between her grandmother and her grandfather. She had seen her grandmother turn to a pale, bloated shell of her former self, where she wasn't allowed to open her mail, to see friends. Every detail of her life was controlled by this little girl's grandfather. And so, growing up, the child saw this really stark contradiction between this loving, vivacious woman who was so sensual and alive and nourished every fibre of that little girl's being to this child, this scared, dependent child in an old woman's body who had absolutely no agency in her own life. And that little girl, in that moment when she saw her grandma days after the overdose, vowed not only to be everything that her grandma couldn't, but she vowed that she would save her. She vowed to be a perfect little angel so that her grandma would never feel that pain again. And so the woman grew up. She went through years of therapy, coaching, self-help, you name it. And thank God she learned that that 8-year-old little girl couldn't carry the weight of her grandmother and shouldn't have carried that weight, was in no position to save a grown woman. And yet a part of her still believed that she had to. A part of her was still trapped in time. And she was that 8-year-old little girl feeling abandoned. And so I want you to reflect on this story and think about the relationships you've had with caregivers in your own life. Where have you had to grow up before your time? Where have you secretly or overtly taken responsibility for adults when you were just a child? Where have you learned to silence your own wants, your own needs, your own values, your own beliefs, your thoughts, your feelings, your spontaneous self-expression, because you were constantly looking out for someone other than yourself? And sometimes the examples of that aren't as overt as they were with that woman's grandmother. Sometimes they're subtle. Sometimes it's being a small child and being your parents' confidant and hearing about the relationship drama between the two of them. And you might have even felt proud to be in on your parents' secret and feel like you were someone that they could lean on. And maybe fast forward 10, 20, 30 plus years later, and you wonder why you feel so tired, resentful, anxious. Even if on the surface you've got your shit together. In fact, you might be helping everyone around you get their shit together. You might get or have advanced degrees and work out every day and have an immaculately clean diet and a beautiful career and the 2.5 kids and white picket fence. You get where I'm going with this. And you can still feel trapped in time to that place where that 3, 4, 10, 15-year-old child took on burdens that they were never meant to have. That child that you were could still be trapped in time inside you, even if you've never touched those memories consciously again, even if you've closed the door on them. And sometimes the influence of these memories isn't clear right away. It takes a conscious willingness to sit with the memories and love yourself enough not to run away, and love yourself enough not to punish yourself for the person you couldn't be back then, to protect yourself from the pain that you endured. Because it wasn't your job. That 4-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old child did not have the capacity to protect themselves, because it was their job to be protected. And now you are grown enough to have the agency, to have the love, to have the strength to reach back into those memories and give those inner children the love that they desperately needed and couldn't get at that time. And you might be wondering, why would I do that? Why would I relive all that pain and trauma that I've worked so hard to run away from, that I've worked so hard to become the opposite of, that I've hinged my success on being the exact opposite of who that child was, who those children were, who my parents were, who my grandparents were. Hate to break it to you, and you might already know this in your bones, but the apple never falls far from the tree. Those children, those parents, those grandparents are and will always be a part of you. And your task, if you want to truly feel whole, to truly love yourself and not just pretend you've got your shit together so someone else will love you, is that you have to rebuild your relationship with these people who still live inside you. You have to forgive. And that word might piss you right the fuck off, because there could have been some real wrongdoing there. You could have been abused or neglected, or abused and neglected yourself. You probably have. And I'm not saying to condone that. I want you to try on a new definition of forgiveness, where it's not about condoning, it's not about excusing behavior, it's not about taking on the blame and the responsibility of other people's actions. It's about freedom. It's about creating space between the narrative of who you've learned you are and who you've had to be to survive with people who could not show up for you, so that you can choose another story to claim as your own, to claim as your home. Let me give you another example of what I'm talking about here. Worked with a man for about 2 years. He was middle-aged, had older parents who had survived the Holocaust. This man was Harvard educated. He was an illustrious doctor. I can't even remember the collection of degrees and accolades he accumulated over his lifetime. And when he was 3 years old, he was sexually abused by an uncle. And so at that age, his parents were very poor. They were living in Holland, and he was their only son. So even at that young age, he woke up at the crack of dawn. He learned to cook, he learned to clean, he learned to muster up scraps of food from the neighbors' houses so that he could provide for his family. And he would wake up in the middle of the night to his parents screaming at each other, screaming out in the nightmares of flashbacks that they had from their time in concentration camps. And after the abuse happened, this man has a conscious memory of feeling that he was even more dead than the heaps of corpses that his parents would talk about. As he got older, he all but forgot what happened in his experience with his uncle. But around puberty, 12, 13, even though his parents were at that point financially stable, he had access to food, they were able to provide for him physically, he felt intense anxiety around eating. He found that he couldn't eat more in those ages of about 12 to 13 than the equivalent of a few slices of bread a day, even though he was an incredibly active child, even though he needed so much more to nourish him as a growing boy. And like the woman I mentioned before, he grew up, he tried to find answers, he would read, he would talk to rabbis, he would talk to fellow practitioners in the hospitals that he worked at. When he got even older, wondering why did he have this fraught relationship with food? Why couldn't he nourish himself? And what he found out decades after he started consciously restricting his food intake as just a 12 or 13-year-old boy, was that the starvation made him feel like he belonged. The starvation made him feel like he was part of a family that he never felt truly loved by, that he never felt truly seen by, that he only felt a sense of connection to when he was taking responsibility for their food, their trauma, their unspoken dreams. And when he had that revelation, he decided that it was time for him to take responsibility of his own life and learn to feed himself, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally. He learned to feed himself first as a matter of practicality, and this man is a very practical person. He knew that he was deficient in nutrients that he needed to ultimately survive and eventually thrive. So he worked with practitioners to get him on an eating plan that would allow him to have the nutrients and the calories that he needed to replenish his body and stabilize his mind so that he could get a handle on reality again. Because he was so stuck in his trauma and the pain of his past that his whole perception of who he was and the life that he led was warped. And he knew that it was only by replenishing those nutrients that he could find ground again in the here and now. So he did. And as painful as it was to restrict, it was even more painful to face the pain that drove him to that restriction in the first place. But now the difference was he was strong enough to face it. And he knew, as brutal as it was, that the only way out was through. So he cried, so he raged, so he screamed, so he felt as though his whole being and life was falling apart, and he sat in the mess of those broken pieces, and he breathed, and he prayed, and he asked for help and for answers that he didn't have, and he was willing to sit in the unknown. And so if any of this resonates with you, I invite you to sit in the unknown with your pain. I invite you to stop chasing answers and to start being with and in your body. I invite you to simply let yourself be, even if it's for 5 minutes a day. You stare at the ceiling and breathe. You take a leisurely walk around your backyard. You put a hand to your heart and one to your stomach, and you feel the embrace of someone who is willing to love you. And you simply stay. You have the willingness, I invite you to have the willingness to simply welcome what is beneath your hands. There is nothing to do. There is nothing to prove. There is nothing to strive for. There is nothing you need to be worthy of your own care and attention. There is nothing you need to change to love yourself now, just as and where and who you are. I'm not expecting you to believe what I'm saying. And I'm not going to try and convince you that it's true. Because if I tried to convince you, it would only push up against those parts of you that are forcing you to believe that what I'm saying is a lie. What I'm asking you to do instead is just experiment with being still, with going curious about what is present for you in this moment. Even in that moment of silence we just took. What's coming up for you? This might be a good place to pause the video, free write, get a pen, a piece of paper, and just move your hand and breathe as steadily as you can and see what comes out. Your curiosity is your salvation, not your attempts to outrun your past and your pain. I'll say that again. Your curiosity is your salvation, not your attempts to outrun your past and your pain. Allow yourself to go where you feel, to go into the places inside you where the feeling is, where the pain is, where the joy is, where the aliveness is. And it might scare you shitless because you can't control it. And you have learned to control rather than to trust yourself in this life. But the only way out, not only of the pain, but into the new possibilities of how you can love yourself, is through. The only way out into those possibilities is in sitting in stillness with open hands and allowing yourself to gently touch and listen to and feel and sense the parts of you that have always been there. And you might be wondering, as someone who is probably very achievement focused and results driven, what's the point? What am I going to get out of this? And I would challenge you on that thinking, because the question, what am I going to get out of this, will again return you back to those survival mechanisms that are forcing you to prove that you have to earn your right to breathe, that you have to earn your right to just be on this earth, because you need something to show for your existence. The only way you can find freedom from that need to prove your right to exist is to stop proving yourself, to stop proving to yourself that you have something to show for the miracle of being alive. I want with all my heart for you to realize that you being alive is enough. And I don't mean just you breathing in this world in a physical body. I mean that your aliveness is where you'll find the love for yourself. A couple of years ago, I took a pole dancing class, and I was looking around me and I could just feel the pain and the striving of the women in that room, because they weren't strippers, they weren't sex workers, they weren't there to get down. They were women who had sweatshirts zipped up to their necks. They were single mothers who had never taken a pole dancing class before. They were the exes of partners who'd abandoned them. And they were trying so hard to find some kind of joy and sensuality in their bodies again, and to feel like they were wanted and that they wanted to be in their bodies again. And I just felt so sad. And then the instructor said, when you look at yourself in the mirror in this class, when you find yourself trying to get the moves right, make love to yourself. Make love to your reflection. She said, go back to a time when you were a baby, or even think of babies who look at themselves in the mirror and they'll kiss themselves and they'll look at their hands and they'll look at their toes, and they don't care that they have 10 rolls on their belly, because they are just in love with the miracle of getting to experience life in their bodies for the first time. For the first time, you get to do that now. Just by growing curious. Just by asking the question, who am I in this body, and how can I feel at home in it. Because this is your one true home on earth. Your mind is probably wonderful, and so is your soul. And you can only get in touch with the love within both of them if you are willing to be here. So when you look at yourself in the mirror, I want you to think of that baby, of those babies, even if you're not a kids person. You're probably an animals person if you're not a kids person. That's what I've found with people. Think of a puppy or a kitten or a young animal in the wild, tumbling and stumbling and resilient and soft. Think of any living being that resonates you in their innocence, in their learning to do and be and experience life for the first time, before anyone told them, implicitly or explicitly, that it wasn't safe to be in their bodies, that it wasn't safe to be who they were. When you hold these images in your mind long enough, you can actually inhabit those tiny, cute little bodies and remember the playfulness and that the suppleness of the flesh, the natural ability to breathe and to roll with the pain and the joy of living in a living body that can feel. That's where you'll remember the love. So I challenge you to do something fun. Do something that you already do that's fun in a new way, where you're feeling your body from the inside and telling yourself that this moment is brand new, that you are brand new in this moment, and oh my God, what possibilities do you have to surprise yourself by what you can find in this moment, how you can love yourself in ways that you never thought possible. How can you be willing to love yourself in ways that you can't know, in ways that are there to be discovered? Can you open yourself to the possibility of a new way of being in your skin, where you're innocent again? And let me remind you, I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just inviting you to play with the idea that you're free. That the pain inside you, that the anxiety, the depression, the unworthiness, the fear of being good enough or doing it right, your resistance to giving everything to others and settling for scraps, for refusing to receive, for not trusting yourself or others, that can be there. That doesn't need to be solved or even ever solved. And you can still choose a more spacious way of being in it all, of letting your curiosity lead you to even the smallest moments of joy that you might have overlooked in your preoccupation with running from yourself. And just know that as alone as you might feel in this moment, with all the shit that you've got going on inside you and all the shit that this talk might have brought up for you, you're not only not alone, but you cannot be alone. Even the chair that you're sitting on right now, the ground beneath your feet, were made by hands who have worked to support you. The cells in your body were given to you by your ancestors without you having to ask. You don't have to ask for the air you breathe, for it to flow through your lungs, for you to experience the joy of taking a long, slow, deep breath in this moment with me. I know we've covered a lot of ground. I know that in the stories, in the ideas that I've asked you to experiment with, in the pain that might be singing in your body a bit more loudly right now, in your resistance or anger or fear, whatever is present for you in this moment, there's a lot to take in. And know that all of it belongs to the life you'd love to live, to the love that you're longing to feel inside you, to express, to pour out of you, to see in the mirror when you look at yourself in innocence, to rediscover what that innocence even is or even could be. And know that every time you breathe, every time you look in the mirror, every time you meet yourself with a willingness to love yourself in this moment, even though you don't know how the fuck you're going to do this, and you don't like yourself, and you maybe even hate yourself, that willingness is the start of a future of your choosing. Your commitment to being with yourself and simply growing curious by what's inside you is a living invitation for everyone who crosses their path to join you in that exploration, in that cold and broken hallelujah of freedom. So it's not just about you, and it's all about you. Thank you.